Hello, good evening, and welcome to Spectrum Debates number 6, whether you're watching on YouTube, Google Plus, or elsewhere. Tonight, as usual, each of our guests has picked a topic for us to debate. They will introduce their topic, and then we will all debate it. In a few moments' time, I'm going to introduce each of them to you, but as ever, more than ever, we want to hear your views. We want you to send in your questions, points, and challenges to our guests, and I'll do so and pass them on as best I can. Please do so on Twitter using the hashtag SpectrumDebate, singular, and I'll try and get as many of them in as I can. If you're watching on Google Plus, you can also use the Applause app, which tells us how much you agree or disagree with what is being said by any particular guest at any time. But without further ado, let me introduce you to our guests, and we'll find out what their topics are. Our first guest is Luke Lewis, amateur animation artist, call centre worker. He shares his personal opinions with those around him. He's a socialist. He has core values, and he is a supporter of Plaid Cymru. He's broadcasting tonight from South Wales. Good evening, Luke.
Hello.
What would your topic be tonight?
My topic is on distribution of wealth and devolution.
Thank you very much indeed. Our next guest is Tom Hewitt. Tom is 18. He's on a gap year before heading off to university to study history. He's a conservative with socially liberal but Eurosceptic approach, and he's broadcasting tonight from Surrey. Good evening, Tom.
Hi, yeah, my topic is austerity and how we're going to tackle the deficit after the next election.
Thank you very much indeed. Our next guest is Bradley Booth. He's an SNP supporter. He's studying international relations and politics at Dundee University. He's a centre-left social democrat who's broadcasting tonight from Dundee, and as you might just be able to see from the flag behind him, I imagine voted yes in the recent referendum on Scottish independence. Good evening, Bradley.
Good evening.
And what would your topic for debate be tonight?
My topic is on trading and whether we think it's a necessary evil.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Our next guest is a returnee. It is John Mousley. Originally from Leicestershire, he is a History MA student at Aberystwyth University. He's a supporter of UKIP and a supporter of beards, and he and I share a love of the Bayer tapestry. Good evening, John.
Good evening.
Can you tell us what your topic is tonight?
Tonight I'll be arguing that we should remove the passports from Syrian jihadi fighters and bar their entry into the UK.
Thank you very much. Last but by no means least, another returnee is Dylan Morris, a law student from Devon, describes himself as the Wicked Witch of the West Country and the Joan Rivers of the Conservative Party. He's a feminist Blairite with an unhealthy love of the European Union, brackets, for a Conservative. Good evening, Dylan.
Good evening, Gareth.
What's your topic this evening?
My topic this evening is the reform of drug laws in the UK.
Thank you very much indeed. Hello to you all. My name is Gareth, and I'm your host for tonight. Full disclosure, I'm a Conservative, but I'll do my best to play devil's advocate and to challenge all of our guests equally with your help. Our standard disclaimer, of course, is that whilst our guests may well support a party, none of them speaks for or on behalf of that party, so please take everything they say tonight as being their own personal opinions. And don't forget, if you'd like to appear here next week or in future, we would very much welcome you. Get in touch ASAP. We begin tonight by asking our first guest, who was drawn using the laser selection machine, and that guest is Tom, and Tom is going to open the debate on the autumn statement and the deficit. Over to you, Tom.
Okay, so on Wednesday we had the autumn statement where the OBR set out the spending plans for the next Parliament, and it showed that over the next Parliament the size of the state will be reduced, well, under plans at least, to 35% of GDP, which is the smallest since the Second World War. Both coalition parties have signed up to this plan, so both Lib Dems and Conservatives support it. I think the debate is between, well, the Lib Dems want to have a balance of 80% spending cuts and 20% tax rises to reach budget surplus by 18-19, and the Conservatives only want spending cuts. I'm of the opinion that we should just have spending cuts. as opposed to the 80% cuts, a 20% tax ratio, which we had in the last election. But my biggest concern, actually, this is against the Conservative line. I'm a bit worried about where the spending cuts are going to fall. At the moment, the impression I get they're mostly just going to fall on welfare and on the non-protected departments. And I think the government's making a mistake by protecting pensioners in particular. For example, richer pensioners have free bus passes. There's the triple lock on the pension, so it will rise by 2.5%, even if there's no compelling economic reason to do so. And I'm just really concerned if they do protect all these departments, and particularly pensioners, what's going to happen to the non-protected departments like defence and other departments like that after the election. So I'm just quite interested to hear what the rest of the panel think about how we should tackle the deficit and whether we should. I know some other panelists are probably opposed to tackling it at all, or tackling it in a serious way, but yeah.
Thank you very much indeed, Tom. Now, in our first show, in fact, I'll come to John next, but in our first show, we actually had a topic about whether or not pensioners are getting off lightly during spending cuts. No, it's a really interesting one, and that was the topic, but we veered off it pretty quickly, and I think that's a really interesting point. John, I'm going to come to you first.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I think the autumn statement was a very good autumn statement. And I agree with Tom that really we need to be looking at spending cuts ahead of tax rises to deal with the budget deficit. I also agree, I am slightly worried that the government is sticking to the easy options by going after particular areas. It is ignoring particular protected departments, as you said. And I think to tackle it, we're going to have to look much more honestly at where we can cut. I don't think anything should be off the table. Specifically about pensioners, I'm quite protective of pensioners, to be honest. I think that they do get a good deal, but they get a good deal because, one, they've put a lot into the system, and two, they're the most likely to vote. So I don't think anyone is ever going to not give them a favourable outcome as far as spending cuts are concerned. I would also add, as well as spending cuts, we need to be looking at tax cuts as well to encourage growth, especially at the lower end of the pay scale, so people feel that they have money in their pockets and they're willing to go out and spend to get the economy moving and to attract business.
Okay, so far what we've had is a pretty sort of standard neoliberal approach to this, talk of spending cuts rather than anything else. Does anyone have another view on this?
Me. I'm much more of the opinion that we should be trying to just grow our way out of this. That we cutting into the welfare state has proven to be disastrous, completely disastrous. That we've seen countless people now forced basically to live without work for numbers of years. Like I myself spent almost 3 years without work after leaving university. I have not been able to go into to the field that I studied, and I've had to rely on basically sort of, for lack of a better term, low-end work. You know, this is not an economy that we can be proud of by any means, and that this isn't something that we can work towards for people to do, or sort of, you know, we need to have new sectors. We need to think much bigger about the growth that we want to see, and we need to start making cuts to business rates in particular, because I think it's small businesses that will help us grow, especially in Wales. We've seen nothing but small businesses getting hammered over and over and over again by the Tory and Liberal coalition, and I don't see any change in that if they were to go in again. I have seen, in my view, I personally think that Labour are going to do near enough the same thing as the Conservatives this time round. We've got a term that we'd like to use here in Wales now that seems to be sticking pretty well, in that they are red Tories, and a lot of people are starting to feel that they aren't seeing Tories being fought against by Labour this time round. They're actually seeing Labour give ground to Tories. They're seeing them almost try and chase after their voters almost in Middle England, and I think that's detriment to their core vote and to the left. I think they've left the left completely open for new parties to come in and take those votes. My party is aiming to do so in Wales. We put forward a pretty attractive proposal, I think, for a lot of people who are unhappy with the left in Wales, and we are hopeful that they will pick it up. I know that in Scotland it's been incredibly successful. We are very similar countries and have similar desires when it comes to our economic performances. We might not have oil, but we have incredible amounts of green energy. We know we've got probably more than even Scotland, and we are much smaller. Yeah, we're falling behind. When it comes to the autumn statement, we've just got to grow. We've got to think about growth. We've got to think about small businesses. We've got to think about the low end. It isn't going to be big business that gets us out of this. It hasn't been in the past, and it won't be again. I think it's dangerous to even think that big business will save us this time round.
Thank you very much indeed. We've got a lot of comments coming on here. I'll read a few of those out, and then I'll come to whoever'd like to speak next. First of all, we have Christopher Keane, one of our first Spectrum debaters, he is at Christopher Keane. Tax rises on the rich would close the deficit more quickly. Cutting the 50p tax rate was a hypocritical move by Westminster. Lily Jane Summers, at Miss Lily Summers, another of our regulars. The defence budget is going to be torn to pieces in the next Parliament. Ellie Silcox, hello Ellie, at Ellie_Silcox. Pensioners are the most likely to vote, but surely we need to change that pattern. Chris goes on to say that perhaps we should scrap Trident, end high-end rent by spending the money on new council houses instead. And Stuart Crow, at Stu Crow, the welfare state hasn't been cut during austerity. That's part of the problem. Spending has carried on as if nothing is wrong. And Lily, just responding to the point about red Tories, I think here, Plaid Cymru is dying in Wales. Let's not pretend that they're the left-wing alternative. I'll let you come back to that one in a bit, Luke. Who else would like to have a go on this one before I come back to those who've spoken already?
Yeah, I've got some comments to make.
Dylan.
Yeah, okay, just replying to the first points made by Tom. Quite a lot of people are scared about where the axe is going to fall. Looking at welfare, as was raised by Luke, a lot of people are feeling the force of the cuts already, but everyone is terrified about where the axe is going to fall next. I hate to tread on the toes of any future debaters in this debate, but I do think looking at Trident is one of the main things we need to do. Replying to Chris Keane as well, who said that cutting the 50p tax rate was a bad move. I'm trying not to take the party line this evening too much, because I'm not meant to be here as a Tory. We've already got a Tory on the panel. I'm here more as an independent, but it has increased revenues. That's an undeniable fact. We have got more revenues from a lower rate. That's just what's happened. If that doesn't suit the ideology you support, I'm sorry, but that's actually what has happened. I think really we need to look at, I hate to say it, but I think the Lib Dems are actually correct. We do need to look at a balance of cuts and tax rises, because if we don't, 100% spending cuts, that's a lot of money coming out of the economy, and that's not just going to hurt people, that's also going to hurt the economy as a whole. Taking that much money out of the economy in a really quick way, any economist will tell you taking that much money out of the economy over such a short period of time, even if people weren't reliant on it, even if people didn't need that money to live, it's still going to really make the economy contract. Whether or not it's going to make people suffer, which it's going to if we take it all from welfare or pensions, even if we take it all from defence, we're going to lose jobs. What we need to concentrate on, and I hate to say it, but I am agreeing with the socialist on the panel, we need to fuel some jobs here, and I agree again, we need to cut small business rates. That's a great idea. I can't believe a socialist is saying we should cut taxes on businesses, but we should cut taxes on businesses. The corporation tax rate coming down has been a massive, massive thing. That's really helped the economy grow. Revenues have gone up, more businesses, more jobs. It's fantastic. And I think another thing that we need to look at, and I hate to bring the EU into things so early, but we need to combat the fact that we should fight against EU immigration. I think that's a complete fallacy. I think EU immigration brings jobs, it brings growth, and I think that's something that we need to fight for rather than fight against.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was muted, wasn't I?
Yeah.
That must have been very. I'm so sorry. As our guests will testify, so far tonight, I've been pretty incompetent. I've been getting everything wrong. I've been pressing the wrong things, and I've not done everything I should have done. So I apologise for the fact that I've just been. I'm going to shut up and carry on. A few comments from you at home who've been excellent so far. There's a big debate going on at the moment between Labour and Plaid Cymru and SNP on Twitter in terms of whether or not Plaid Cymru is a viable left-wing alternative. Ben Walker's wading in with Atlas Snubbed with some polling data, saying that Plaid Cymru aren't dying. They're polling higher today than what they got at the general election. In terms of the general economic arguments, on welfare, Councillor Charles Fifield, that's Charles Fifield, saying that welfare reform is returning the welfare state to its original principle in the 1942 Beveridge Report, and he's tweeted, and I've retweeted on the Spectrum account something about that there. Cami Singh at Cameron Singh CL. Plaid can't be a radical left party without losing votes in their conservative Welsh-speaking heartlands. Chris at Kitto_13, and he's responding to Lily in terms of tax revenues. He's saying that it's like standing in a bucket and trying to pull yourself up by the handle. Anyone want to come back? I'll come back to you, Luke, because there's been a bit said in particular about Wales, and your comments that have sparked some debate.
Good. Debate is good. Yeah, when it comes to being a viable alternative to Labour in Wales, they have, for all intents and purposes, decided to leave the left behind. They've no desire to stand up for anybody in the working class environment anymore. They've left that. I think this is why actually some people are actually shifting over to UKIP. They were never left to begin with. They just weren't Tories. They weren't able to fit in with that conservative image that has been painted up for some people, and they don't like it, so they've just voted for Labour instead. I personally think they're swippy-swappy. You can swap between either of these two parties. I don't find there's any real differences between either of them. I think people in Wales, as well as Scotland, as well as England, are deciding that enough is enough. If we want left alternatives, if we really want an alternative to the right-wing agenda that is coming up through the media, through a new political party that's coming back onto the scene now, then yeah, we need to start looking at opportunities like Plaid Cymru, like the SNP, and like the Green Party in England, and form the new kind of alliance that we've been talking about for some time. We don't want to see the Labour Party being able to get away with saying things like vote Labour to keep the Tories out, when they're going to vote with the Tories on near enough every single subject matter. They voted for the welfare cuts. They didn't vote against them. They claimed they would, though. They said they'd stand up for these people. And yeah, they haven't done. Like, you can say that we're not viable, but I'm the only individual here that will say this, maybe Brad as well. When it comes to these things, we don't stand for austerity. We're quite firm on this point. We don't want to see austerity anymore. People have been hammered by it too much. It's about time that some people on the higher end of our society really start taking some of that responsibility as well. They can't simply palm it off onto the lower end anymore. It's not acceptable. It's just not. It's not fair on people to do this. Like we believe in a community spirit in Wales. I think that's always been a very Welsh point of view, that we believe in community. I think this party that I'm a member of tends to pursue that agenda as well. We do think that locally a local party is very important to a national party. you will actually hear slightly differentiating of opinion in the local areas within Plaid. A lot of people misunderstand what Plaid Cymru actually stands for to some extent. I heard one of the commenters say that there's a Conservative vote in North Wales when it comes to Plaid Cymru. I find that rather odd. The North Walians that I know are all quite left. Now, that's not to say there are no Conservatives in this party. There is left, there is right in this party. I would argue there's probably more left than right, but we are trying to be the national party for Wales. We've got to start somewhere. You know, pick today as a starting point, then, you know, I think we're starting off quite well. I've had good conversations with people today about, you know, where we can go as a party, and we are looking and feeling quite confident in the seats that we're targeting come 2015. We're confident that we might make gains this year, and that we will provide the new left alternative, the new left alliance that has been talked about in the media. Both myself, my colleague in the SNP will probably be able to sort of back me up on that. You know, we are serious about providing that balance of power this time, and we will be holding Labour to account on the number of things, including welfare cuts. They want to cut and cap welfare like the Conservatives. They can try, but if they want to have our support, then they're going to have to give way on some of these points, especially on devolution. So I'll come back to that later on.
Lovely, thank you very much indeed. Bradley, I'm going to come to you in a moment. Welcome back. Just a couple of the comments that people have sent in. Our favourite Twitter handle, a confused ninja, has tweeted us again. Nice to have you back. Placements in SMEs who need staff but can't afford minimum wage. The state could continue paying JSA and the company could make up the rest. That's one idea to help boost employment. He's also saying that the welfare spending is unchanged because most welfare spending is pensions and in-work benefits, which goes alongside with the growth of lower paid jobs. We've had quite a few comments in terms of the nature of the SNP and Plaid Cymru. Ryan Power at Ryan Power RP is saying that Wales doesn't have the same desire for independence as Scotland, but Plaid aren't dying, not at all. Chris Keane is saying that the SNP surge just makes Plaid look poor in comparison when actually they're doing all right. And Cameron S and Lily both make points on how divisive nationalist parties such as Plaid and the SNP splitting the UK has potential danger and threats to our country. Bradley, over to you.
Well, I'll be careful about what I say because I've missed a few.
That's okay, you go for it.
But coming back to the point about the deficit, I agree something has to be done about the deficit. But what we can do is go after big business who are costing us 70 billion per year and not paying taxes. Or even scrap Trident, which is costing Scotland alone 2.125 billion per year. Now we can do a lot with that money. Rather than continue with the immoral austerity that the Conservatives have been pushing through Parliament, which has forced child poverty to 33% in Glasgow, 28% in Dundee, and 39% in Manchester, which is pretty shocking if you ask me. Now, I'm not sure how we could really go after this with cuts. I think Luke was right, where we have to really try and expand and grow the economy out of this. That would be my opinion on the issue anyway.
Thank you very much indeed. So I'm going to ask people now for any final comments they want to make before I come back to Tom to close this part of the debate. So, John, I'll come to you.
Oh yeah, just quickly. A lot of people have talked about growth here, and I think that's one of the key points. We can cut the spending to get the deficit down, but I think one of the key things is to cut taxes to get growth moving, to give people money in their pockets. So it's up to them that they can help the economy move by spending more. By just doing this spending, because as you say, we would take lots of money out of the economy, and that would be dangerous. But I think combining the spending cuts with tax cuts could help both small businesses and people get on their feet and get the economy moving. Finally, just to come back on this EU thing that Dylan mentioned, considering we're net contributors, shouldn't we have a bit of a look at it?
Dylan.
Yeah, sure. I'll take it on. a couple of comments on previous comments that have been made. First of all, someone said that these cuts are taking the welfare state back to its original purpose of 1942. Personally, I don't want to be in a country with 1942 levels of welfare spending or a 1942 level of welfare ideology. That's something that I absolutely do not want to live in. I would not be proud to call myself British if we treat our poor in the way that we treated our poor in 1942. John, of course, I'll argue with you on the EU until the day is gone and many, many years have passed. But I think net contributors, absolutely. But what we get out of the EU, we get monetarily, possibly not. But in terms of recent statistics that were released saying that we get, I can't remember the exact figure. I'm going to jump at £7.1 billion over the last 10 years. That's just a guess. I think it's right. It might not be. Over the last 10 years, contributed to the economy from EU immigration. Out of the EU, external immigration, we did fall. We did not get as much money as we needed, but EU immigration definitely was a net contributor. We should not look at EU immigration and demonize it. We should not look at EU immigrants and demonize them. There were a couple other points which I have forgotten, so I'll end there.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to go to Luke and then some comments, and then Tom, you've got an opportunity to close. Luke.
Sure. When it comes to the EU, when you're saying we're a net contributor, who's we exactly? What part of the UK is a net contributor? I would argue it's probably the banking sector in London that's netting most of that contribution. I wouldn't argue that most of England is actually a net contributor. I think that, and this again, this comes back to my topic that I will raise later. But I think that's an incredibly simplistic way to argue the EU, especially from a Welsh point of view, where we're not a net contributor, we're a net receiver in funds, and they've helped considerably. They won't, however, do all the work. You need to have a government that's at least competent to deliver on that front. We don't have that at the moment. We are trying to at least make that a little bit more apparent to people. After all, UKIP recently just held a conference in Wales, and it did so in a park that's received countless amounts of money from the EU to look as good as it does today. It wouldn't have happened any other way. I can tell you now, it hasn't come from the UK in any previous years. Why would it suddenly change? When it comes to austerity, again, we're not arguing that there wouldn't be cuts. There would be cuts, but we're not arguing cuts to welfare. We're not cutting to people on the low end. We feel that the cuts need to happen for businesses, in particular, small and medium. We think that those are the backbone of near enough not just Wales's economy and Scotland's economy, but indeed probably England's economy as well, outside of London and the bigger cities. That these are the things that will drive us forward. You cut those rates, they increase the opportunities for them to take on employees, and that reduces the amount of people who are then looking for work. It then increases the opportunities for people to be able to employ people on the living wage, which I think these are all key things that we should be aiming for. And they can be achieved generally across the entire British Isles. And I will make one last point, but I'll keep it brief. Someone mentioned independence for Wales, and that it's not supported in Wales. We completely accept that. That's why we aren't arguing for independence for Wales right now. We're arguing for independence for Wales sometime in the line, some way down in the future. You know, let's talk about it openly. Let's not hide it in the background like we're pretending that we don't want it. We do. We do want to see an independent Wales. We want to see an independent England and an independent Scotland, and us be able to partner with each other on an equal basis instead of being forced into something like we feel we are constantly having to do within the UK. We feel like, especially from an English perspective, the English can get a little carried away with talking about Britain and England collectively as one identity, and we almost get lost in it. I think this is, you know, we have got several different and unique issues within both of our nations that are different from the English one. And I can understand, with England being the largest part, how easy it can be for that to happen. And I can honestly, I can see that. And when it's raised, usually, I think a lot of people then accept it. They go, oh yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't realise things were quite so different. Wales is the poorest part of the UK. You know, we've been at that point now for some time. It's not like you can suddenly apply the same kind of regulations and things that are being applied in the City of London to Wales. They're hitting us even harder than they would even London. So it's not working. And I don't think that is narrow. I think that's, you know, that's standing up for our individual areas. I think there is a voice for England here that I can support and I can get behind, the same as I can get behind my SNP colleague as well in Scotland. There's no narrowness here. There's no anti-Britishness here. We're just British in a different way.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Tom, you're going to close this topic for us in a moment. A few final comments. I have to say Twitter has exploded on this one. Thank you all. Some fantastic debates going on here. Just a small selection that I can fit in at this point. For example, where are we? And of course, naturally, the ones I was going to read out, I've now gone and lost. All right, all I will say is some very complimentary things being said here about Luke, about how Plaid Cymru are the only people offering a non-austere alternative to Liberal, Labour and Conservative from London. We've got Cameron asking, would coalitions that involve nationalist parties in the House of Commons be a real problem? There are debates going on about the nature of the welfare state on there right now, and other things. And I'm so sorry. I seem to I've rather lost control of that. Thank you, Tom. Can you finish this topic for us, please? And then I'll use the laser selection method for the next one.
Yeah, I'm going to avoid talking about Wales because I'm not really an expert on Welsh politics. But on the austerity thing, I personally just think it's crazy how anyone could oppose austerity, because all you do is you just shove the issue into the future and make it even worse. I think the national debt is growing by £3,000 a second. It's 1.5 trillion. So if you don't have austerity, that pile's just going to keep getting larger, and everyone's children are going to have to pay that off. So that just means living standards will be worse in the future. On the issue about tax cuts, yeah, I do agree with John and Luke. We should have tax cuts because they help grow the economy. In terms of tax rises, the reason I'm worried about tax rises as the Liberal Democrats, because what taxes would they actually increase? National insurance, inheritance tax. And I think if people are going to propose tax rises, I think they then have a responsibility to actually explain what taxes that they would increase. So that's why I do come back to pensioners, because I think it is unfair to put all the welfare cuts on the working age population, and it's particularly that 2.5% rise, automatic rise in the pension, regardless of average earnings or inflation, which I think is really unfair. But yeah.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you all for your comments on that one. At home, I hope our next topic, which will be a little bit shorter, but that will get you debating equally. Let's get the high-tech laser selection machine out and going. And this one is going to be opened by Dylan. Go.
Okay, so I'm from the somewhat seaside town of Plymouth, and a tragedy hit our city over the last couple of weeks. Two lads went on holiday to Amsterdam, and they bought what they thought was cocaine, but it was actually white heroin, and they snorted it, and they died fairly quickly. There was a huge campaign to get them flown back over because it would cost a lot of money to ship their bodies, but that part's irrelevant. But what Amsterdam did after that was, rather than react in a poor way, in the sense that they said, oh, let's ban this drug, let's ban that drug, they started distributing white powder testing kits to make sure what people were snorting was actually safe. Safe as safe as drugs can be, safe as much as cocaine can be. But I think Britain has to look forward now. Look at countries like Amsterdam, places like that, because in our sense of the word, people die a lot more in Britain from drug-related illnesses and drug-related deaths than they do in Amsterdam. We're talking about illegal drugs now, and I'm aware that alcohol and cigarettes taken into the equation may warp the statistics either way or the other. But in Amsterdam, drug-related deaths are far lower than they are in Britain, and that's, I think, because it's safer. It brings what is a black market in Britain into the white market in our country, and personally, I would argue that we should look toward liberalising the drug market. Not necessarily legalizing all drugs, but making it safer, possibly a needle exchange program for heroin users, because if people are addicted to heroin already, they're not just going to stop because the government says it's illegal. They're going to carry on doing it, but it's going to be dangerous. People are going to get HIV. People are going to reuse needles. People are going to use dangerous levels of heroin because they don't know any better. If we legalize drugs such as not necessarily heroin or cocaine, maybe the softer drugs, and if we deregulate the drug market and make it a little easier for people to access safe drug use, I think then we're going to see a real decline in people dying from illegal drug use. I just wonder what the panel thought about that.
Okay, thank you very much, Dylan. Who'd like to open up on this?
I'll take it.
Fire away.
I agree. We need to effectively. I would be resident to say legalize all drugs. There's a lot of very dangerous class A's that are still very, very poorly understood. But I think there's. I have friends who do drugs. I have friends who even deal drugs, low-end drugs, I must say. But as one of the dealers said to me, why isn't there anybody saying that we're winning? That anybody who actually wants to get something right now can do so, and they can do so without being harassed at the moment. Why would they want to see it change from the present model? I would argue that actually Newport is probably the marijuana capital of the UK. I personally think that there's probably 80% of even the city is actually engaging in its use. Now, I don't think that's going to be a particularly popular view with a lot of people in the political spectrum, but it's true. And anybody who wants to walk the streets with me will be able to see it and smell it. And just put simply, there was another study saying that that people who are smoking 5 marijuana joints a day, every day, around my age, I'm 27, are having the lungs of 80-year-olds. And that's a study done in Bangor University just this week. So there's a lot of heavy use of drugs, low-end drugs to high-end drugs, but it's the low-end drugs being used so much and without being regulated to some extent. You know, even if it's closing hours, you know, like with a pharmacy, you can only go at certain times to pick up the drugs you require. To my knowledge, at least in Wales, that's the case. If these kind of things are done over a counter, at least you can expect to have a better, smarter person using them on the end. But I'm unsure really. Plaid Cymru's policy, of course, is to look at the drugs laws in particular and reform them. We are all pretty much of the opinion that the war on drugs has failed, and it needs to have a new look at. And I think this goes beyond party politics at this stage. I think this is a very serious issue that needs to be tackled by everybody very openly, and everybody needs to be quite happy with the outcome as well. This isn't left versus right. This is dealing with, quite frankly, something that probably kills more people than even road accidents. So it needs to be looked at. It needs to be tackled.
Lovely, thank you very much indeed. I think it's certainly true to say that whenever national politicians try to talk about drugs and drugs policy, they are jumped on and hounded by tabloids in particular, so it becomes almost impossible for it to be spoken of and talked of. A few comments so far, then I'm going to go to John. Robin, Miss Robin Alice, is saying that my view on this has changed so much over the years, but I do agree that some legislation needs to be considered. Lily is saying that, where are we, that we need to treat drug use as an addiction, just like alcohol, rather than treating them like criminals. I think it's true to say that the NHS and the courts do actually now do an awful lot of treatment rather than just criminalising people, and often it's an alternative that can be used. And we've got here Roger Patterson at Councillor R. Patterson, who I think is joining us next week. Drug dealers should be treated on par with murderers and sex offenders. They need to be locked up for a very long time. He's making the point about the dealers there. And Cameron S. At Cameron_surname. We could legalise marijuana and make lots of money on taxes for it. No NHS helpful related issues, though. Right, John, what do you think?
Yes, I think Dylan's points about offering help to people were almost spot on. Currently, I think in the UK, or England and Wales, there are about 3,000 drug-related deaths a year compared to about 2,000 related to vehicles. So there's a serious problem going on. However, as far as legalisation goes, I would stop at marijuana. Marijuana currently in the UK is perhaps the largest drug used, and as far as I can tell, is just about as bad for you as smoking. So I'd be fine with legalising that. I agree with the councillor, though, that with drug dealers we need to treat them much more harshly. There need to be longer sentences for drug distribution and drug dealing, especially with harder drugs. This point about the war on drugs being lost, I mean, when you're losing a war, you don't just give up.
That's not what I mean.
This is killing thousands of people around the world each year. To say give up, legalise everything,
no.
I don't think it'd make it better. With marijuana, fair enough. I think that's not too bad. But with everything else, we have to tighten our belts down. We have to be much more harsh.
Thank you. Sorry. Who wanted to say? Luke, quickly respond to that, and then I'll open it to the others.
I wasn't suggesting that we legalise everything. By far no. There are many high-end drugs. Heroin being a high-profile one in particular that clearly, obviously, isn't going to get legalised. No one's going to argue for that one.
So it's just I kind of got a bit confused between high-end and low-end. I mean, the only one I'd even consider would be marijuana. Everything else.
I wouldn't necessarily restrict it to that. I think there's a number of people who have argued to me that, quite frankly, something like even mushrooms to acid is a relatively small end. And don't necessarily cause health concerns, and haven't actually really been properly studied. And I think by banning them or trying to approach it from that angle isn't particularly helpful when it comes to resolving this. People are going to do this stuff whether you like it or whether you don't. It's how we end up coming back in and make this work for all of us, really.
I'm not arguing we punish the particular abusers. I'm saying help them. I'm saying we need to cut off the supply. We need to cut off the dealers.
Impossible.
Because I think...
Yeah, it's impossible. You haven't done so far. Look at the amount of money that we have lost so far to the war on drugs so far. It just doesn't work. It doesn't work. You can look at it in terms of America. You have large amounts. You've even got situations where Mexico is being accused of importing large amounts of drugs. They can't stop, and they police their borders. They have guns on their borders. They still get the stuff in. It doesn't work.
Okay, a few comments from our audience, and then I'm going to ask if Tom or Bradley want to come in on this one. Liam Bones at Liam Bones is saying, if we legalise drugs, then people who injure themselves because of it should have to pay for their NHS care. It shouldn't be a further burden on our NHS, and the same should go for alcohol and tobacco. If you pay for the drug, you should pay for the treatment needed because of it. We've had... no, that's on the same topic there. Weird Times at Weird Times, WYRD. It's a tricky subject, this one. Benefits of legalise, regulate, tax and educate outweigh carnage, cost and futility of the war on drugs for me. Robin, again, is saying essentially the laws do nothing right now. So a more productive stance would be to tackle it legally. Ellie Silcox is agreeing with the points that Luke made about saying that you're certainly right. In Aberystwyth and Cwmbran, I find the streets stinking of weed, and even at work. Right, Bradley, I don't know if you want to add anything on this point.
Yeah, well, I'm coming from the cocaine use capital of the UK.
Right.
In Dundee, or at least it was. I'm not sure if it's changed, but I think I would agree with up to marijuana, maybe even anything that we could consider low end. But we talk about marijuana being a gateway drug, but I think what the gateway is having to deal with shady characters who are constantly, they're not just dealing in marijuana, they're dealing in stuff like cocaine, heroin, and they're going to be pushing that on people. At least if you open it up to having to go to a dispensary or for medical use or whatever, you're not dealing with these people. So there's less chance of you having the opportunity to buy something like cocaine or heroin.
Thank you very much. Tom?
Yeah, so I do partially agree with some of the other members of the panel who think that we should legalize some drugs, particularly marijuana. I think we need to have a evidence-based review about what's actually effective, particularly on these kind of borderline drugs where there's a lot of debate about whether they should be acceptable to have or not. I think my worry about those who advocate a wider legalization, we need to think about what sort of society we are and what message we want to send out to people. And my worry is if we had a kind of full-scale legalization of drugs, I don't think as a society we should be saying that's okay. And I think the law is the ultimate way of saying what is and what isn't okay. But yeah.
Thank you. A few more comments here. Again, this is proving very popular, and I can barely keep up. Cameron S is saying that we should remember that the laws on drugs are there to prevent health risks and even death. Where are we? Confused Ninja. Are we, as a nation of excessives with alcohol and drugs? Do we have a national mental health issue? Ryan Power. Vice will always exist. You can't stamp it out. All prohibition did during 1920s America was make the mafia millions. An interesting debate going on online here in terms of healthcare and how it goes, following on from what Liam said. Nathaniel Higgins at NathGGNS. I disagree with the point about the NHS. The drug should be heavily taxed, with large amounts of that tax going towards the NHS. It's conditional. The Dimple Boy, at the Dimple Boy, drugs should be analysed individually rather than as one big group of evil. Jack, at Mr. Jack MB, I'm fine with legalising marijuana, but I'm not sure about harder drugs. Some really, really excellent points going on there. Dylan, what do you think about what you've heard so far?
Yeah, it's a good debate so far. I'm really enjoying it, actually. I think the point about the NHS is what I'll come back to first. I think the way the National Health Service works is if you're ill, you get treated. Whether you've caused it yourself, that doesn't matter. You've paid into the system, you get out of the system. Whether you've jumped off a bridge and landed on a car, you'll be treated. If you cut your own throat, feel free to come to me for a bandage to completely bastardize, sorry for the language, a Mrs. Thatcher quote. The point about legalizing drugs, making it easier to access them, that's completely untrue as well. Illegalization or prohibition doesn't make it impossible to get drugs. It just makes it dangerous to get drugs. In fact, it's pretty damn easy to get drugs. It may even make it harder to get drugs if it is legalized. People under the age of 18 will find it harder to get drugs. People maybe who have proven mental health issues, who we don't want to exacerbate their mental health issues for drugs, it will be harder for them to get drugs. People who are proven addicts won't be able to get drugs if we have the power to tax, regulate their existence. At the moment, we have absolutely no control over them. For people to say that making them illegal means that we have the problem under control, that's absolute rubbish. It's the opposite. It means we have absolutely no control. It's not in the hands of the state. It's not in the hands of the people. It's in the hands of a very few people who control the drug market. They have the money to control it because they've made enough money off poor people who have, gone to them for their mishmash of drugs, which, quite frankly, are extremely dangerous. God knows what a lot of the cocaine in the UK market is cut with nowadays. If my friends want to go out and snort cocaine, which some of them do, I've got no problem with that. It's dangerous. I wouldn't do it, but I know some of my friends do. I'd rather them get it from a legal cocaine dealer rather than someone in the back alley behind one of the awful places in Plymouth City Centre.
Thank you very much. A couple more comments, then I'll just ask anyone to make some brief points before Dylan closes this one. We've had Michael Gady at Got Four Wheels. Surely taxation will not end the black market, such as dealers. Look at cigarettes and alcohol. The problem with the legalisation of drugs, says W.O. Brown at W_O_Brown. The problem is with the legalisation of drugs, the regulation of them to make them safer through the GMC, the CQC, and even HMRC. We've got lots of debate still going on about benefits and Wales and so on and so forth. Alessia here at Upon a Cloud, who I need to report she had a problem with her food and dinner the other week because of this show. Her pizza has worked tonight, so I'm very happy about that. I don't support legalisation, only decriminalisation. I don't see conclusive research to justify this. Final comments, anyone, before Dylan closes?
No, go on. Go ahead.
John?
Just to say, you were talking about legalisation, how it's easy to get drugs now because they're illegal. Are we saying it'd be hard if they were legal and just regulated? I mean, underage drinking exists.
I'm saying it'd be harder.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely.
I must admit, I thought it'd be harder to buy alcohol if it was banned, because I found it really easy to buy alcohol when I was underage.
Yeah, there's an interesting point here from Stu Crow. I don't know if anyone wants to just think about this in their comments. At Stu Crow, look at drug use in jail. The best way to get someone hooked on drugs is to send them to jail. The criminal paths aren't working. So, Tom, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, that point about the black market. If you legalise drugs, I think that does need to be emphasised. If you legalise drugs and heavily tax them, they could be even more expensive than they are now. So I think the black market would continue to exist because people would want to get them cheaper. And also, if they were taxed, young people in particular who don't have as much money will be even more inclined to go via the black market. So I think you could just be shifting young people. Or keeping young people on the black market, but if that makes any sense. But
Thank you. Luke, Bradley, and then Dylan to close.
Yeah, I think the black market one is a good point. Yeah, if you look at cigarettes are quite heavily taxed right now, and if they are too heavily taxed, people will find other means of getting their cigarettes, whether it's going abroad, or whether it's buying them from the guy at the bar or whatever it is. You know, there's always someone who will sell them at £2 less than the £6 they're on sale for, and they will be with German or something else written on the front. So you aren't even getting the warnings that are meant to be there. So I think there's a good point there. That's why I don't think heavy tax is necessarily the way to go. Some tax has to be applied. If it's going to be legalized or at least decriminalized to some extent and sold on behalf of the state, I think it does need to be monetized in some way. It needs to feed back into the NHS or even into other services if there's quite a lot of it and people are doing what I assume they will do, which is what they are doing right now, which is for the vast majority of people who are doing drugs, they do them relatively safely. They don't end up in a hospital because of them. And there's still a lot of people still have the opinion that drugs aren't actually that bad and that people are pushing them as being the biggest evil on the planet when they really aren't. And especially the key ones that people are doing, like marijuana and even cocaine to some extent. People will do them. If they want to do them, they want to seek them, they'll find them. If you restrict them into having to go into a store, maybe even having to have a card, much like the Americans do. I don't completely agree with their model of it being a medical card. I don't think that's entirely right, although I think there's medical reasons to use marijuana for sure. I've seen enough studies come out of America now to be, fairly confident to be able to say there's medical reasoning to legalize it. But yeah, it does need to be taxed. It does. It's just not a lot. Maybe 15% of its overall. It's not a lot.
Thank you very much. Right, Bradley, your marks, then Dylan to close. Just one comment here. Bruce Tollerfield, at Bruce Tollerfield, is saying surely it would end the black market, legal production, legal tenders, and it would create legal jobs. Bradley.
Well, I can only speak for Scotland here, but we have a big drug problem. And I think what we're doing just now obviously hasn't worked. We need to do something different. And I think through maybe education, not flat-out legalization, but legalizing some drugs, of the weaker drugs. We can teach kids, teenagers, that, okay, it's dangerous, but it's not as dangerous as we're making it at the moment. It could maybe bring down use of drugs like marijuana, heroin, and the other causes of death that are across Scotland anyway.
Thank you. Dylan, to close.
Okie dokie. Thanks everyone for taking part. It was a really good debate. I really enjoyed it. I think the main thing we got from the debate is that no one is really agreeing with the current system, which is what I've got from almost everyone I've ever spoken to on the drug debate. No one says, yeah, absolutely, we're really hitting the nail on the head by demonizing drug users and drug dealers. I think that there's definitely a three-way progression. We've got kind of criminalization, decriminalization, and then legalization. I think we need a happy medium, but I think before we do anything, we need to have some sort of education about drugs, because at the minute, I really hate to quote South Park, but drugs are bad, okay, is literally what we get in schools. That's actually what we get. I mean, I've recently gone through the whole, PSHE program about drugs. It's, oh, this is a drug, don't do it or you will die. And that's kind of what we go away from school feeling. And then you go into the world and you see people taking drugs and you realise, oh, wait, no, you don't just automatically die if you snort a line of cocaine or you take a puff of the joint. That's not actually what happens. And so as soon as you go out into the outside world, you see that what you've been taught is utter rubbish. And so you discredit the entire drugs education you've received because what they've told you is not true. So we need to start with some sort of education program about drugs. It's the same about sex at the minute. It's kind of a taboo. But I think we need to look at drugs education, and then we can start looking at decriminalization, because someone said earlier, the best way to get someone hooked on drugs is to put them into the most drug-filled environment in the world, and that's prison. It's probably easier to get drugs in prison than it is anywhere else in the world. You can smuggle them in ways I'm not going to go into, so I'm sure it'll disgrace quite a few viewers. But you can smuggle them in a variety of ways. And people come out of prison hooked on drugs and they've not even gone in for drug-related offences. And then we can start looking at legalisation. We can start looking at maybe legalising the softer drugs. Medical-related usage is a completely different issue, I think, but I definitely think there's a reason to look at that as well. I've met quite a few MS patients. My next-door neighbour is an MS patient, and I'm sure there's definitely a way we can have some sort of medical marijuana that's not going to destroy the livelihoods of too many people, maybe actually create quite a few jobs in the time being.
Lovely, thank you very much indeed. Now, guests, we've had 2 of our 5 topics, and we've been going an hour. So, our challenge now, been going an hour, it's remarkable, isn't it? Over an hour, in fact. Our challenge now is to see if we can make some of these a bit speedier. So, using the high-quality laser selection process, the next one is going to be, Bradley, it's yours, and it's Trident.
Okay, well, basically, in a world where the biggest threat to the UK and most countries is terrorism and cyber-terrorism, my question to the panelists, do they agree that Trident is worthwhile? For Scotland, it costs us $2.125 billion per year, and that could buy, I've got it written down here, build 5 hospitals, 10 high schools, 30 sports centres, train 100 doctors, 100 dentists, 200 teachers, host the Commonwealth Games, dual the A96 from Inverness to Aberdeen, and dual the A9 from Perth to Inverness. Now, I'm pretty sure the UK is spending more than just Scotland on this. So the amount of money that we could use from that can really benefit the country. Not just that, we have 33% of children living in poverty in Glasgow, which is only 30 miles away. So it's a bit of a kick in the teeth for them to see the government spending money on that, but not on them. So what are your opinions on?
Thank you very much indeed. Who'd like to talk about Trident first?
Yeah, I'll take a shot at it.
Off you go, Dylan. I won't want to predict what you're going to say.
No, of course. Well, I'll start by a disclaimer. I think, the only people I've met that's a member of both the Conservative Party and the CND. And this love for the CND was actually fueled recently because the lovely Nicola Sturgeon of the SNP said that if Scotland leave the UK, we should relocate Trident to where? Plymouth. That's where I live. I don't really want nukes just on my doorstep, and I do live extremely close, as in less than a mile from where they would be. And I've received letters in the post saying that if we have a nuclear emergency, this is what you should do. I don't want to live in this state of constant fear. And I understand that we have a terrorist threat at the minute, but it's domestic terrorism we need to be worried about. We're not going to have terrorism in the form of missiles fired from the Middle East. It's going to be people that go onto our tubes and onto our buses and into our schools with bombs and guns. Those are the people we need to be worried about. So yeah, if we scrap Trident, we're going to have a massive amount of money to play with, whether we want to bring the deficit down, whether we want to bring some new jobs to the UK, if we want to build some schools or hospitals, or even if we want to put that money into more domestic defence. Anything you want to do. But looking at Trident, it's not useful. It hasn't been useful in the past. I can't see it being useful in the future. Of course, I may eat my words when we get a massive missile fired at us tomorrow, but I'm going to bank on the fact that I'm not going to have to. I'm thinking we're going to keep it short, so I will end my comments there, but if you want to come back to me in a bit, I'm sure I've thought of some more to say.
Thank you. I just checked something, because Bradley said twice about the cost of Trident to Scotland. That figure, I'm just looking at fullfacts.org, the figure of 2 billion a year, 2 to 2.4 billion, is not costing Scotland. That's the cost for the whole of the UK of Trident over the last several years. Because otherwise the cost of the whole of the UK for that per capita would have been something like 25 billion, which is in the vicinity of, I think, not far off most of the defence budget. The predictions, or rather the costs from 2016 onwards, the cost from 2012 was 430 million, so it's dropped in the last few years, although they're not quite sure why. But that's the cost for the whole of the UK, not just Scotland. Right, anyone else want to say anything on this one? John, military historian.
Yes. Okay, couple of things. Firstly, I'm not overly bothered by what we mount our nuclear warheads on, to be honest. I've seen good arguments for both plane-mounted nuclear warheads and ship-mounted nuclear warheads. What I would just say about this Trident thing and the use necessary evil is the most recent example of nuclear disarmament has been Ukraine, and look how that turned out for them.
That was definitely why they got attacked. Russia thought, oh, they've nuclear disarmed, let's invade now. That's exactly what happened.
Do you think if they had nuclear weapons, Russia would risk it?
Absolutely.
Really? I didn't think they were that mad.
Do you think they would have fired them?
Yes.
You think that Ukraine would have fired off nuclear weapons into Russia?
Yes.
I don't think so.
Me neither.
I don't think so.
Fact is, we'll never know, will we?
No, we won't. Oh.
For starters, the European Union is a collective when it comes to such things, and for a country to act in such a way would be absurd and completely against the rules.
Well, Ukraine's not in the EU, of course.
Yeah.
Are they?
No.
Oh, are they due to join?
Not for a long time.
It started.
All right, okay. All right, I rescind my comment.
Tom, you wanted to say something, I think.
What was I going to say? I think Dylan said our only problem was domestic.
No, our biggest problem, not our only problem, but our biggest problem.
Because I don't entirely agree with that. You see a more aggressive Russia today. You have North Korea. You have Iran. And would these countries take Britain as seriously if we didn't have nuclear weapons? I don't think so. The other point as well, would we really be safe if we did abolish nuclear weapons? I think we'd be just as much of it if there was to be a situation in the world where there was nuclear war. We're a key ally of the United States, and if we didn't have nuclear weapons, I think we would be a key target. So I don't think we'd be any safer if we abolished them. I think that perhaps a middle position, which might be worth pursuing, is if the EU works towards a missile defence shield. I think that was cancelled a few years ago. I think maybe if we spent our money towards that, that might be sensible. But complete nuclear disarmament, I don't agree with at all.
We've got a few comments on here already. Some people agreeing with John's point about Ukraine was one of the few countries who've recently got rid of their nuclear weapons, and their defence has turned out to be not quite so good, particularly as they were relying on others. Here we are. Stuart Crow is putting the point to Dylan. If you're scared of nukes, do you know that you've already got a number of nuclear reactors in old submarines alongside at Devonport?
Yes, I do know that.
A few others here. Brett, why does this thing then scroll away? It obviously hates me. Brett is agreeing entirely with what Luke and Dylan and Bradley have said in terms of, but I've lost his comment. Here we are. Money needs to be spent on the living and not killing. And so we've got comments on both sides, not dissimilar to that. So, where are we? Sorry, my screen is literally jumping up and down here. I can't follow what's being said on Twitter right now, and I think my app has lost the plot. Anyone else want to comment on this one quickly?
Yep. For John, if the UK ever was nuked, would you feel okay with nuking another city full of civilians just because their government nuked us?
Yes.
Yeah.
Personally.
Really? You'd be okay with that? Just because they nuked us, their government, not the civilians.
Okay,
because their government nuked us, we murder their civilians. You think that's morally good?
Say someone.
You think that's something our nation should stand by?
Okay. Say Russia nukes London, and then we don't nuke them. Do you think they'll suddenly stop nuking us? Do you think, the UK hasn't fired back. That's great.
Why would the Russians attack us
exactly?
I don't know.
No, but the point John's making is a moral question, because we are talking in essence in one part about this being a moral issue, not just a practical one. But of course you have to take into account the practical scenario, and John is pointing a scenario out.
Sure.
People have put other ones forward. We don't need it because we no longer have that kind of warfare. That's a scenario. John's scenario is, well, if we are attacked by another country with nuclear weapons, do we then just not retaliate? That's the point he's making. And can someone try and answer that particular scenario?
I think it's a hypothetical that could only come about because we have nuclear weapons. We'd only be attacked by nuclear force if we were considered a nuclear force ourselves.
Well, I don't think Japan would have agreed with that, would they? They're the only country who've suffered it, and they weren't a nuclear.
Yeah, in 1945. I think we've moved on a bit then militarily.
Yeah.
Now that's even better.
Yeah, I would. Someone mentioned North Korea. North Korea no longer have the capacity to do it. It's been reported that they've actually used up all of their reserves to do it already, and they can't do it anymore. They won't be able to produce a nuke anymore. They'd probably have to buy one. So that's the only way they're going to be able to do it. When it comes to Russia, I think demonizing Russians is, quite frankly, almost offensive in today's sort of media. I think it's quite offensive to demonize Russians as if they are the evil of the world, and they want to come along.
Who's demonizing Russians as opposed to demonizing the Russian government?
Yeah, well, it's Russia is, that's not necessarily pointing the finger at the government. It tends to point the finger at Russians, and I don't agree with doing that. I think if we're going to be serious about trying to get rid of nukes in the world, which can only really be a good thing to remove these kind of weapons from the planet altogether, it's not solely about the UK, although we are obviously all from here. That we are trying to live on an island that is trying to set an example to emerging nations. If emerging countries from Africa, the Middle East, and so on see that this country seems to feel safe when they have nuclear weapons, so we must have nuclear weapons so that we feel safe too. And then when does it get to the stage when we have a dangerous individual who's then leading this particular area, like, say, your Russian point or the Russian government, and then decides to press the button? I think that you're egging people on to want to have nukes. We've got the situation with Iran. The only reason that they want to have nukes is because the West has nukes, and that they get threatened all the time and pushed down because of people who have nukes. I just don't think that this is a particularly helpful course for the planet to be engaging.
a few more comments that people have made, and then I'll come to someone else who wants to respond to some of those issues. Councillor Charles Fifield, sadly I suspect you're all too young to remember the Cold War. I can remember the tension of the early 80s and then Glasnost. W.O. Brown, and when would we press the red button? Only in mutual destruction. Where I'm trying to find some from the other side as well. Bruce Tollerfield, North Korea are only a threat to their own people. Russia is already Russia already overpowers us hugely, and we should stop Iran making missiles in the first place. Nick James R at NR_Nick James. The only country to have used nuclear weapons are our allies, the Yanks. So, further comments, people.
I think that's a good point about the Americans. You know, we're constantly being chopped up as being the best buddies, you know, the special relationship or whatever it is. These are the guys who actually use the nuke. They push the button, and we're talking about theoretical enemies that haven't done it and don't really have any sign of doing it either. They might
Are you suggesting that we might be attacked in a nuclear war by America?
No, I'm just suggesting that they're the ones who have had the nuke and have started this whole process off. You know, if they hadn't used nuclear weapons, or at least used it as a threat, maybe at one stage instead of using it, then, you know, would we have a situation where people then, it was a rush to have nukes? Within 10 years, almost every single powerhouse nation on the planet at that point had nukes. And that doesn't sound like a better planet, it sounds like a more dangerous planet to me.
Right. Tom or John, before I come to Bradley to close.
Tom,
go on.
Again about this point about people thinking we'd be safer if we got rid of our nuclear weapons. If we were in the situation where we were to have a nuclear war, and let's just say Russia, because they're the only power which has a significant supply of nuclear weapons. If they were to pass that threshold where they were already firing off missiles at the United States, I find it hard to believe then for moral considerations they'd then stop at the UK. So I'm just not convinced at all that we would be safer without them. If Russia and the United States and Britain in tandem all agreed to abandon their nuclear weapons in tandem, then I think there's a different argument. But whilst Russia still has nuclear weapons, and us not doing it in tandem, I don't think that makes any sense.
Do you not think
I'm
that
so sorry, I'm going to have to curtail this debate now because we've still got 2 more topics to go, and I think we've done it quite well. I'm going to ask you to close this one in a sec, Bradley. Just a final couple of comments here. Rugby Mad Dragon at WRU for me. Trident is no good against terrorism. It's about politicians still pretending the UK is a major power. They're little boys' toys. David Jeffrey at David Jeffrey _ pointing out the argument used before. By that logic of they having them, they're only getting them because we've got them. The only reason you'd get shot with a gun is because you yourself are a gun owner, and it's clearly balmy. Michael Gady, if the whole world gives up their nuclear weapons, then so should we. But not having them will be taking a knife to a gunfight. And Ryan Power, Russia's aggression is due to concern that its neighbours joining NATO leaves the West dangerously close to Moscow. Right, Bradley, your final closing comments on this one, please.
Okay. I'm surprised nobody commented about jobs, since that was a lot of people was concerned during the referendum debate. But I think the only way we can really rid the world of weapons is to lead by an example. And for the UK to disarm their nuclear submarine would be an example. It's looking more and more likely with the rise of the SNP and holding the balance of power at the next general election that any minority government are going to have to rely on the SNP, and the SNP won't put through a bill to renew Trident, or support a bill that renews Trident. Personally, I think they're obscene, and to have them in this day and age is wrong. So that's my opinion.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you all for your comments. Final 2 subjects. Let's see if we can get these 2 going as well. The laser display selection process is picking John. Your topic, please.
I'll be brief. I personally believe that we should remove the passport from people who, from the UK, have gone to fight for the Islamic State in Syria or with the jihadi forces.
What do we think about that, people?
Well,
Bradley.
Okay. Really, people vulnerable that have been talked into sort of idolizing ISIS, they get there and realize just how bad it is. It would leave them nationless. So it's really making it easier for ISIS to recruit, because once someone's there, that's them committed. They can't come back. They've got no British passport, so that, I think it would only increase the problem.
Thank you very much indeed. Next person.
Yeah. I do have sympathy towards the argument that we should take away their passports. My worry is it's a bit of a slippery slope, because once the government starts arbitrarily taking away passports for particular issues, where would it end? Would they go and use that power in the future? And yeah, so I'm just concerned it could end up as a bit of a slippery slope if they do it for ISIS. Would they do it again in future for other issues? And do we want to be in that situation? Does the government bestow citizenship upon people, or is it a thing people inherently have after birth? But yeah.
Thank you. Luke.
I'm very, very firmly in favour of allowing them to come back and being tested and tried by our judicial system. All of our judicial systems, we're going to end up having separate ones, but I think all of them are going to be relatively harsh on people who have decided to go and lop heads off in other countries. I just think trying to ban somebody from coming back is just simply just going to compound the problem. They don't like the UK as it is. The very idea that you could then say, well, you're not welcome, is comical to me. I think that they know they're not welcome anyway. That's why they left. They probably have no intention of coming back unless to attack the place anyway. So I don't know. It seems like a rather odd thing to suggest. If they're going to come back, then let's try them. Put them out in public. Make an example of them with the law, and show that the law is the final thing here. You can't simply just allow governments to start taking away people's rights. Tom has suggested, we are in a dangerous position where governments could take away further rights in future, or extend it, or make the time frame that it's applied to longer. I think it's dangerous. I think we've had similar signs with this, with the DRIP bill that just got rammed through Parliament within a day, without barely any media scrutiny at all. I found that very, very dangerous. I don't like the idea that all of our stuff is going to be logged, whether you're doing something wrong or not. We shouldn't be getting sort of harassed like this by our own governments. I think it's a very dangerous route that we're going down at the moment.
Thank you very much indeed. Dylan.
I'm not committed to either side of this. I've not nailed my colours to either mast. But I think a couple of salient points that were been raised. Isolating people even further when they already quite clearly feel very isolated. I mean, to go abroad to a completely unknown country and fight against the UK, their birth country. They're clearly in a fairly dark place as it is. I mean, if we're going to let people back in, they need to be closely watched. We need to make sure that they are not coming back in to bomb schools or hospitals or tube stations or buses. We need to make sure that they're coming back here to return to whatever semblance of a normal life they had before they left. I think that we need to look at why people are leaving, why people are going abroad and fighting against the UK. There could be a wide variety of reasons. I'm not going to delve into them, but we should look at why they're actually leaving in the first place, rather than demonising them completely and saying they're balmy. The cause they're fighting for is completely ludicrous, and it's something that I think should be fought against at every possible opportunity. But we need to look at why these people think that it's a good cause to fight for, and we need to look at cutting it off at the source rather than looking at when they're coming back to the country. in terms of taking their passports away, I don't think we should. I think they should come back, and I agree with Luke. I think they should stand trial in the UK.
Thank you. John, you're going to close this in a second, but just the comments that people have said so far. Cameron S. agrees entirely, says, yes, done. Take it off them. We've got a Confused Ninja here. Ian is telling us that we can't wash our hands of our own citizens. The problem we need to tackle is earlier in their lives, pre-radicalisation. And Bruce Tollerfield, on terrorism, extremists seem to enjoy blowing themselves up to kill others. The threat of being nuked won't put them off, and I would imagine, therefore, perhaps the passport won't. And Stuart Crow, can't just wash our hands of our terrorists and dump them on the rest of the world. That will be running away from our responsibilities. John, some support for you, mostly, though, not. What do you think?
I must admit there is a lot of good arguments against this. What I would say, though, is a couple of points. If we took the passports off those people that are already there, wouldn't it discourage those who are considering it? Who say, I can never come back, therefore I can never see my family again. Would that not discourage some people from going? Also, on this point of allowing them to come back and face trial, it's a fair point, the law is absolute, but would these people ever not be a danger? And compounded with that, would they not come back, serve, I mean, recently 2 Syrian fighters were sentenced for 12 years each. Would they not serve 12 years, come out and go, look, I can get away with 12 years, you can do this as well, go fight? I think there is, I must admit, foreign policy, there are no right answers, but I must admit, taking their passports off them seems the safer option to me at the moment.
Thank you very much, John. Our final topic is going to be from Luke. This is also going to be the subject of a one-off debate show, just a single topic, which we'll be doing almost certainly now after Christmas. So if you'd be interested in taking part in that, let us know. But we're going to touch the surface on this now, and Luke's going to open it.
Is it finally time? And I'd like to know, because we've got a good spread of UK representation here. You know, we've got a majority English view, and the 2 other nations that are clearly smaller when it comes to the general UK picture here. Is it finally time that we all accept that redistribution of wealth outside of London, within England, and to the individual nations on the other sides? It needs to happen, as well as the power to come with it. That any kind of little bit here and a little bit there kind of approach to devolution simply is not right, and it's not fair. It actually undermines people and the national minorities that are here. You know, one being treated better than the other, or vice versa, or even, you know, to some extent the nationalist argument from both of our nations is that England, to some extent, has a monopoly over the UK, and that we feel sort of squashed out by it. Now it's starting to at least feel like there is resentment building in England towards Wales or Scotland over devolution, over even levels of money, and when the finger is being pointed at our 2 nations, we aren't necessarily being particularly well served by this setup either. And I think that a number of the English people need to start looking at why it is that a lot of their money is being centred around the southeast and London, and it isn't spreading to the north and to the Midlands. If we are to keep a UK, then we need to have this answered. Even if the UK isn't going to last, which I don't think it will, I do not think that that any kind of centralised kind of money service in one section over others has provided us with a strong UK, or indeed a UK that many people want to fight for and will actually fight against. It's why I feel so passionately that Wales should be almost single-handedly the ones that decide what affects us. And I know this is the same case for many people in Scotland as well. Is it time now? Like, England is generally asking for its voice, it's asking for a parliament. Should we answer that? Should we give them their parliament? Should we allow them to have Westminster as their parliament and remove the limited powers that Welsh and Scottish MPs have, and finally put them into our institutions and respect each other on an equal basis? Has it finally come to this time? Are we going to accept this point, or are we going to continue to fight against each other and eventually cause the breakup of the UK within bitterness instead.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to stick my oar in and tell you all my view on it, and hopefully you'll all be able to be similarly as brief. I think we need an English Parliament. I think the 4 national assemblies of the UK need to be given the same powers, and we can use the model that Scotland has and even it out throughout. That's the simple, easy way of dealing with this, and that should also help resolve issues over funding. On a purely factual basis, as someone who lives in the north of England, we do get higher spending per head here than they do down south. Perhaps the only exception to that would be London, which has, of course, very specific issues, and of course has to rely on public transport far more than elsewhere. But in general, public spending is much higher the further away from London that you get, and of course a lot higher in Wales and Scotland, and even higher again in Northern Ireland. But that's my view. That's my pennoth, and that's the length of answer I'm hoping to get from people who'd like to have a go.
Can I just say on the English Parliament point? I'm heavily opposed to that. Politicians are unpopular enough as they are, without introducing another assembly of 500 politicians, and also then just logistically in terms of how it would work. If you had an English First Minister and then the Prime Minister, who would be most influential? Who would form the government? What I think we need to have instead is the Assembly representatives from Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland to act as the MPs on the UK Parliament for issues such as defence and foreign policy, and then most of the remaining issues can be devolved, and then they can go and sort those issues out in their own assemblies. But yeah, that's my view.
Thank you very much. A couple of comments before I come to the next person here. Weird Times is pointing out that England doesn't even rule itself, and that the English people are being completely ignored, and he's tweeted a graphic demonstrating how that happens, and I've retweeted that on Spectrum Debates. Christopher Keane, 2 other nations, he asks. What about Northern Ireland and Free Cornwall now? If Harry is watching, he'll be very happy about that one. Ryan Power, England does have a monopoly over the UK, but that's probably because most of the population lives in it. Cami Singh here is telling us, I think we need a decentralised federal system. However, the regions and nations would have to stop relying on London's largesse, and that's another thing that unites UKIP, radical left and Celts, bashing prosperous, globalised Greater London. Stephen Donnan from Northern Ireland, whom I'm hoping we'll have on next week. Devolution of power should be dependent on the proven ability of devolved government to deliver with existing powers. Interesting point, although quite hard for us in England because we don't have anything like that here. And Stuart Crow, the Devo cat is out of the bag now. A stampede of local authorities all fighting over what form it should take. It is a shambles. Right, who'd like to go next?
Go ahead.
I was just going to say I agree mostly with Gareth, to be honest. I think we need a federal UK. I would also love to see lots of devolved powers to local councils and county councils, as well as having 4 or 5, indeed, nation assemblies, as well as the UK Parliament.
Thank you. Who's next?
Yeah, I'll quickly say that I agree with John. I agree with Gareth. I think a federal UK is the way to go. I know, Gareth, that wasn't quite your point, but it's on the way to it. I do think a federal-ish UK is the way to go. Devolution to county councils, city councils, absolutely.
Bradley.
I agree with Luke. The UK is coming to an end soon enough. It's really a win-win for the SNP because either the Smith Commission isn't delivered, and that increases support for independence, or the Smith Commission is delivered, and we break further away from the UK. But really, either way, there's going to be a growth in confidence in Wales, Northern Ireland, even England, if we do get an assembly, and Scotland, that we can govern ourselves, and maybe we should be more equal rather than have a Westminster government that works on the interests of London.
Thank you. Right, Luke, I'm going to read a couple of comments and then I'm going to give you 30 seconds to close this final topic for today. Confused Ninja Ian is telling us that Yorkshire and the North East is a match for Wales and Scotland. They get significantly less spending, and English Parliament wouldn't help. Weird Times have an English Parliament in the Midlands, plus devolution to shire, town, city, and parish levels. Worry, but he's then asking, when did the English vote for these regions that someone had talked about? I think it's fair to say we haven't. Michael Gady, give powers to councils, let's not create another layer of administration with more parliaments. And Cameron S, the Lords should decide, lots of time to think and not worrying about the popularity. It's sort of accountable as they are from, they're selected by the Prime Minister. Liam Bones, put an end to the North-South divide before we devolve. The Chancellor talks about the Northern Hub and forgets about the cities north of Manchester. Right, Luke, you've got 30 seconds to close this topic.
All right, I'll try and do it as quickly as possible. I'm not surprised by the response. After all, you're all unionists, apart from myself and Bradley. So I'm not surprised that you want to see a federal UK. The Lords, I think, could actually be scrapped as far as what it is, and actually be turned into what would now be a new UK body. I did kind of hint that Westminster could be the English Parliament. You aren't creating new MPs at that point. You aren't creating new members. You are electing the same kind of people. You aren't replacing them. They aren't two tiers. You are getting the same thing. So this time we will be creating a smaller Lords with considerably less money being going towards those individual packets as well that they receive. So I think that might actually work in a UK model if it's to stay around at all. But even if there is no UK, that kind of body would still exist. I still think that we are all very, very capable of working together without being stuck politically. I think it's more than possible. I think it's almost offensive to suggest that we aren't suddenly going to be friends when we break up. The argument in Scotland was to have open borders, socially open borders, and a shared currency. That seems pretty fair to me. You know, this is a similar thing that Wales would argue for as well. These aren't narrow things. These are quite open. We want to continue a good relationship here. But yeah, I think the one thing that was missed was redistribution of wealth. Now you mentioned that our spending was higher. Yes, it is, and the same goes for Northern England and Yorkshire as well, as the point was made. That might be the case, but when you have a situation where people are earning considerably more personally, like the English average, I think, is 22,000, whereas the Welsh average is 15,000. That's £7,000 less per person on average in Wales to spend, and that has nothing to do with the couple extra quid per head. That doesn't really help us an awful lot when it comes to living. You know, this is money spent by the state. You know, this isn't you being able to, you know, go off and buy a tidy car, travel, you know, go on holiday, you know, live a life that you want to live. Instead, you are relatively restricted economically. This is, I think, why Wales is struggled so far to grow. We have had a situation where this has been compounded for many, many years. We've even managed to get Labour and the Conservatives to agree that Wales is considerably underfunded and that it does need to be addressed. Now, pointing fingers and saying Scotland's taking all the money ain't going to work. We know that it's being centred around the southeast of London and England, and London, and the banking culture is sucking the money up. We are aware of it. We don't want to see it happen. This is why we have brought it up as a subject for England to discuss, because it's affecting England quite a bit. And I think that England wants to see it sorted just as much as we do.
Thank you very much indeed. That last point I found quite interesting because, from my understanding, at one point it was the banking culture that was actually paying 20% of tax receipts in the UK, and they're not actually sucking things up. But that's a debate for another time. The devolution debate, we will be having a show entirely based on the issue of the UK Constitution and English devolution, or what to do in England now, indeed, whether or not you believe in that. We'll be having it after Christmas. If you'd like to get involved, please let us know. DM or tweet us at Spectrum Debates. We'll put your name down and we'll try and get that sorted. It won't be on a Sunday, it'll be another night of the week. to make things a little bit more interesting. Thank you very much indeed. Can I thank, please, everyone on our panel for joining us? Thank you very much indeed. Bradley from Dundee. Thank you, Dylan from Devon. John, who's in Aberystwyth tonight, Luke, who's down in South Wales, and Tom, who's in Surrey and from sunny Cheshire. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you to all of you who have commented, all of you who've watched. We've had thousands of people watch our videos all together now, both on YouTube and Google+, and this is only our, we're not even 2 months in. So thank you. If you'd like to appear down here, or down there, I'm never sure which way around it is. Let us know. We've got our normal show next week. We've got 1 or 2 guests already booked in, but there is plenty of space. It's really easy and hopefully quite good fun. Thank you very much indeed, and I hope to see you all again very, very soon. Good night.